Death is not the end. That is the foundational lie you have been sold. From the moment you were old enough to ask what lies beyond, the answers you received were hollow rituals, veiled threats, or worse, the cold silence of a void. A shutdown, a finality. You were trained to fear it, to avoid it, to see it as a mystery too profound to ever be understood. But what if that was by design? What if death, far from being unknowable, has always had a blueprint? A map that was deliberately buried in plain sight. The ancient Egyptians were not obsessed with death. That is the story they tell you to keep the truth at a distance. They were obsessed with consciousness. They were obsessed with transition, and what they left behind was not a collection of dusty myths. It was a spiritual technology so advanced, so precise, that modern thought is only now beginning to touch the edges of what they knew. The Book of the Dead was never just a book. It was a guide, a manual for the soul, passed down from a civilization that understood the mechanics of what happens when form dissolves. It doesn't just describe death. It charts a journey. And if you've ever felt that something about this reality, about life and death, has been deliberately hidden from you, then you are about to remember what the system was designed to make you forget. They say the Egyptians built their world around preparing for the afterlife, that their temples, tombs, and sacred hieroglyphs were morbid fixations on what happens when the body fails. But they weren't fixated on death. They were fixated on truth. And what they documented was not fear-based superstition, but a system of navigation so potent, so revolutionary, that it had to be suppressed. The Book of the Dead was not a single volume. It was a collection of texts, spells, and vibrational codes, rewritten and refined across dynasties for a single purpose: to guide the soul after the body's release. Not as a metaphor, but as a literal, step-by-step roadmap for consciousness to navigate the multidimensional realms that lie just beyond physical perception. These were not decorative symbols carved into stone to comfort the grieving. They were precise, energetic instructions. Tools to help the soul bypass illusion, shed fear, and ascend beyond the loops of karmic entrainment. To the initiates of ancient Kemet, death was not a tragedy. It was a transition, a shift from one state of awareness to another. And just as you would not enter an unknown land without a map, they believed no soul should pass into the afterlife unprepared. That is what the Book of the Dead was. A soul map, a metaphysical manual, a blueprint for what comes next and how to meet it not with terror, but with clarity, with power, with spiritual sovereignty. It is easy now, from the comfort of a world that mocks what it cannot measure, to dismiss these ideas as myth. But when you strip away the layers of religious bias and cultural condescension, you find something that aligns with terrifying precision to what cutting-edge science and modern consciousness research are only now beginning to glimpse. Quantum theory suggests the existence of non-local consciousness, an awareness that is not dependent on the brain. Near-death experiences from across the globe speak of tunnels of light, life reviews, and encounters with beings that guide and test. These are the same experiences the Egyptians mapped thousands of years ago. They weren't guessing, they were remembering. They encoded what our world has only just begun to rediscover. And it goes deeper. The spells in the Book of the Dead were not magic tricks. They were vibrational keys, words of power designed to activate protection, clarity, and divine alignment in the post-physical journey. Every deity mentioned was not just a god to be worshipped, but an archetype representing a part of your own inner reality. Every trial was not a punishment, but a symbolic confrontation with your own unhealed fear, your own repressed shame, your own unchallenged ego. This was never religion. It was an initiation. Some of these insights are too ancient, too powerful for this platform. That's why we created the Insights Academy newsletter. Sign up at the link below and get instant access to hidden truths, plus a free copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. Modern culture has reduced death to a clinical event. Heart stops, brain flatlines, game over. But for the Egyptians, that is precisely when the real journey began. They knew that consciousness, freed from the body, must pass through a series of gates, each one guarded by forces, illusions, and challenges. Only a prepared soul could navigate them successfully. This is why these texts were sealed inside tombs. Not for the living, but for the one who had just passed. Instructions for the soul. A guide for the unknown. But the tragedy is that most of us will enter that transition with no preparation, no understanding, and no tools, because somewhere in history, that knowledge wasn't just lost. It was hidden. It was suppressed and rebranded as myth to keep you afraid. Because a population that fears death is a population that can be controlled. A soul that doesn't question what comes next will cling to this life with desperation, always seeking safety, always chasing approval, never realizing it has been trained to forget its own immortality. But once you begin to remember, once you see that the ancients left us a map, something shifts inside you. You begin to sense that the fear of death is artificial, that your soul was never meant to walk blind, that you have been here before, and that the next chapter doesn't have to be a mystery. It can be a homecoming. When the last breath escapes the body, something stirs, something ancient, something that was always there, watching from behind your eyes. For most, this moment is taught to be the end of everything they've ever known. But according to the deep wisdom of the Book of the Dead, it is only the beginning of the real journey. And like any journey, the first question is always the same. Where are you going? The ancient Egyptians were not satisfied with vague answers. They mapped the entire process, the stages, the gates, the guardians. They knew the soul did not just drift into a formless void of bliss or punishment. It moved through a structured, multidimensional initiation, and understanding that process was the difference between liberation and being trapped in a loop. To them, the afterlife was not a destination. It was a system of passage, a series of tests and transformations designed to reflect the inner state of the soul that had just passed. Central to this is the realization that you are not a single self. You are a composite being. The Egyptians described the soul as being made of many parts. The Ka, the life force, the Ba, the personality or emotional body, and the Ak, the fully realized, luminous self that emerges only after transformation. These were not poetic ideas, they were detailed models of consciousness. When the body dies, the Ka returns to the source of vitality. The Ba roams the world, or the afterlife. And the Akh is the final goal, the divine self that awakens only when you pass through death with awareness. This is where the Book of the Dead becomes your guide. Its texts serve as energetic instructions for these soul components, especially the Ba, as it navigates the Duat, the Egyptian name for the realm of the dead. But the Duat is not just a place. It is a mirror, a projection of the soul's own state. You do not just encounter beings there. You encounter yourself, magnified. Your fears, your regrets, your attachments all take form. This realm is layered, symbolic, and deeply, instantly responsive to your vibration. Throughout this journey, the soul meets a series of gates, each one guarded by entities that are not enemies, but they are not neutral. They serve one purpose: to test the soul's readiness. To stand before them, you do not need weapons. You need remembrance. You must speak the correct words, recite the correct spell, not because it's a magical password, but because it reflects your inner truth. The spell is a code, a frequency match. If you are aligned, the gate opens. If you are not, you remain caught in the lower vibrations, looping through confusion, fear, and amnesia. One of the most remarkable things about the Book of the Dead is its precision. Spell 125, for instance, details the declaration of innocence, a list of affirmations the soul must speak before the final weighing. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not caused pain. This is not a moral checklist. It is a vibrational tuning. Each statement aligns your frequency with the heart of Ma'at, the universal principle of balance, truth, and cosmic harmony. It is less about being a good person in a societal sense, and more about being in resonance with the fabric of reality itself. In many ways, the entire journey is about resonance. The afterlife doesn't judge you. You judge you. The gods are not punishing you. They are reflecting you. The gates are not locked. They are coded to your state of being. This is not a place of eternal reward or torment. It is a perfect mirror of the life you lived, and more importantly, the consciousness you cultivated. This is not so far removed from what is now emerging in the fields of quantum mechanics and near-death research. Many who return from clinical death report entering realms where thought instantly shapes reality, where intentions manifest, where guides and beings appear not as external forces, but as aspects of the self. These are not random hallucinations, they are echoes. Echoes of what the Egyptians inscribed on papyrus thousands of years ago. So, when you think about death, strip away the fear. Imagine, instead, a process, a structured unfolding, a journey that responds to who you are beneath the surface. Because according to the ancients, that journey does not begin when your heart stops. It begins the moment you decide to wake up. And death simply makes it impossible to hide from yourself any longer. In the modern imagination, judgment after death has been weaponized. It has been turned into a source of fear, a tool of spiritual blackmail designed to keep you obedient, small, and terrified of your own nature. The imagery is always the same: a throne, a wrathful god, a courtroom where someone outside of you decides your eternal fate. But in the Book of the Dead, the most iconic trial, the weighing of the heart, is not a threat. It is a recalibration. The scene appears simple. The soul stands before a great scale. On one side rests the heart, the energetic record of your life. On the other, a single feather, the symbol of Ma'at, the cosmic principle of truth, balance, and divine order. If your heart is as light as the feather, you proceed. If it is heavy, it is devoured by a beast called Emmet, and the soul's journey of awakening is interrupted. That is the version you are told, but the deeper meaning has been deliberately stripped away. This is not a divine punishment. It is not about sin or perfection. It is about emotional, spiritual, and energetic weight. The heart is not a metaphor. It is an energetic storage device. It holds on to everything you never released, every lie you told not to others, but to yourself. Every time you betrayed your own intuition, every fear you swallowed to keep the peace, every shame you refused to look at. The heavier the heart, the more it pulls you down, not to a hell of fire, but into lower frequencies, into the loops of forgetfulness, into a state where true awakening becomes nearly impossible. And the feather is not just lightness, it is coherence. It is alignment. Ma'at represents the natural order, the harmony that underlies all things. The feather is your soul's natural state when it is no longer burdened by false identities, attachments, and the illusions of the world. The weighing of the heart is not someone else's judgment upon you. It is your own resonance meeting the undeniable truth of the universe. It is physics. The judgment scene is also profoundly psychological. The Egyptian soul does not just stand there silently, waiting for a verdict. It speaks. In spell 125, the soul declares, "I have not done this. I have not done that," affirming its innocence not to plead for mercy, but to align its own frequency. These declarations are a form of energy work, affirmations that cleanse the soul's auric field. You are not trying to convince a god. You are speaking into the frequency of truth itself, tuning your own heart toward lightness. Now, compare that to the life you're taught to live. Most of us are conditioned to hide, to suppress, to push down what we truly feel, know, and want. We lie to ourselves more than we lie to anyone else. We chase approval even when it suffocates our joy. We stay silent when our soul is screaming to speak. We carry weights we were never meant to hold, and over time, the heart becomes heavy. Not because we are bad, but because we have forgotten how to let go. The weighing of the heart is a reminder that freedom is not given. It is earned through radical self-honesty, through release, through the courage to remember who you are beyond the noise. And it tells us something even more powerful. No one is coming to save you because no one needs to. The judge is not Osiris. The judge is your own soul. Osiris is simply the silent, still presence that allows truth to be seen without distortion. In that sacred moment, when the heart is laid bare, everything false falls away. There is no status, no title, no number of followers, no opinion of others. Just you, your choices, your resonance. And if your heart is light, not from perfection but from courage, from truth, from love, you pass, not into a paradise, but into your own becoming. This is not a warning, it is a gift. A message passed down through millennia from a civilization that knew that death was not the punishment. Living without truth was, and it is not too late. Every breath is a chance to empty what burdens you, to bring your heart back to stillness, to release the shame, the fear, the weight. Because in the end, it is not about being judged. It is about becoming weightless enough to rise. We think of death as final, a line that, once crossed, cannot be recrossed. But in the great spiritual traditions, death's not just a moment that ends the body. It is a doorway, a rite of passage. And for those who seek to understand the deeper layers of consciousness, it is something that happens long before your final breath. To truly live awake, something inside you has to die first. And that something is the ego. The ancient Egyptians understood this implicitly. The Book of the Dead is not just about the physical death of the body. It is a map for the symbolic death of everything false, everything constructed, everything that keeps you chained to the illusion of a separate self. This is why the journey through the afterlife is filled with obstacles, mirrors, and trials. The soul must shed its false identities one by one until only its true essence remains. Not the version of you created to please others, not the mask you wear to feel safe, but the core, the eternal, the part of you that cannot be destroyed. Ego death is not a modern psychological term. It is the oldest initiation in human history. Every authentic mystery school, whether in Egypt, Greece, or ancient India, knew that if you wanted to awaken, you had to be stripped bare. You had to die before you died. And that process was never gentle. It was raw, chaotic, and confrontational. The ego does not surrender easily. It clings. It defends. It whispers to you that without it, you will disappear into nothingness. But that is the ultimate illusion. The ego dies, and for the first time, you see that you were never the name, the status, the body, or the story. You were the silent awareness watching it all unfold. In the Egyptian texts, death is depicted not as annihilation, but as transformation. The trials in the Duat are not punishments, they are alchemical fires. Each challenge, each confrontation with a gatekeeper is a test of vibration. The soul is forced to look at itself, its attachments, its fears, its self-deceptions, and those who refuse to let go cannot move forward. Not because they are unworthy, but because they are still clinging to the version of themselves that cannot survive in the higher realms of consciousness. Modern spiritual language often romanticizes ego death, painting it as a single, blissful moment of release. But the truth is, it's messy. It does not happen all at once. It happens in waves. It happens every time you let go of an old belief that kept you safe but small. It happens when you stop needing to be right, to be seen, to be validated by a world that does not see you. It happens when you realize that being honest with yourself is more important than being accepted by others. And here is the real secret. Ego death is not just preparation for the afterlife. It is how you access higher consciousness. Now, the Egyptians did not study the afterlife because they feared it. They studied it because they wanted to live more fully. They knew that by understanding the mechanics of death, they could transcend fear, live with clarity, and anchor themselves in what is actually real. They were not afraid of the darkness. They walked through it, not because they were fearless, but because they had the tools. They had the rituals, the teachings, the inner maps. They understood that rebirth does not come from avoiding pain, but from facing it directly, from dying to illusion so you can awaken to truth. When the ego dies, what remains is not emptiness. It is presence. It is silence. It is a knowing that does not need to prove itself. And in that space, the illuminated divine self, can emerge. That is the real destination, not a heaven, not a reward, but the full embodiment of your highest self, free from distortion. This was the initiation encoded in the Book of the Dead, and it is still available to you now. You do not have to wait until your final breath to meet your soul. You can begin the process of dying to who you are not, so you can finally live as who you truly are. That is the gift of conscious death, and it is what every spiritual path at its core has always pointed to. Not an ending, but a return. At first glance, the art of ancient Egypt looks like decoration, intricate carvings, curious animal-headed beings, and mysterious symbols arranged in perfect symmetry across tomb walls and papyrus scrolls. But what if those symbols were never just art? What if they were a language? A coded system designed to transmit knowledge not to the logical mind, but directly to the soul. To truly understand the Book of the Dead, you have to stop seeing it as literature and start seeing it as a form of spiritual technology. Every glyph, every figure, every ritual was constructed with profound intention. They were never meant to be merely seen. They were meant to be activated. These were not allegories. They were vibrational keys, and the ones who knew how to read them were not scholars. They were initiates. Egyptian spiritual symbolism operated on multiple levels simultaneously. You could read a symbol on the surface for what it appeared to represent in the physical world. But you could also read it energetically, metaphorically, cosmologically, and even neurologically. Take Anubis, the jackal-headed god who oversees embalming and guides the soul into the afterlife. To the uninitiated, Anubis is just another character in a mythological pantheon, but to the initiated, he is far more. He is the archetype of the inner guide, the part of you that knows how to navigate the darkness. He is instinct refined into intuition. He is the guardian of the liminal space between death and rebirth. The same is true for the ritual objects and postures. The crook and flail held by Osiris are not just symbols of kingship over a nation. They represent inner mastery over the self, compassion and discipline, softness and strength, perfectly integrated. The Eye of Horus is not just a symbol of protection, it is an encoding of brain anatomy, specifically the thalamus, pineal, and pituitary glands, the so-called seat of the soul. This was not a coincidence. This was knowledge hidden in plain sight. The Egyptians knew that language alone could not convey the full depth of reality. Words are bound by culture, by time, by the limitations of the logical mind. But symbols speak directly to the unconscious. They bypass the filters of the ego and awaken a deeper memory. This is why so much of the Book of the Dead is visual. You are not meant to just understand it. You are meant to feel it, to remember it, to activate something ancient that still lives within your own DNA. Their rituals, too, were not just empty ceremonies. They were frequency generators. When a body was mummified, when incantations were spoken over it, when symbols were painted and amulets were placed in specific locations, each of these steps served a precise energetic function. It was to preserve not just the body, but the soul's clarity, to encode the astral field with guidance, to anchor the consciousness so it could navigate the trials ahead with stability. The truth is, the Egyptians saw the universe as a series of mirrored realities, as above, so below. The physical was never separate from the spiritual. It was a gateway to it, and so every physical action they took had a metaphysical significance. Pouring water was not just about cleanliness, it was about energetic purification. Lighting incense was not just for the pleasant scent, it was an offering to open a dimensional space. These were not superstitions. They were precise technologies, passed down through rigorous initiation and guarded by a priesthood that understood their power for thousands of years. And yet, today, much of that understanding has been buried under the weight of academic dismissal and cultural arrogance. We have reduced these profound symbols to mythology, forgetting that myth is often just truth encrypted in story. We see the rituals as irrelevant relics, not realizing they were always meant to be repeated, not copied blindly, but reinterpreted through direct, personal experience. Because these symbols still work, these frequencies are still alive. You just have to remember how to use them, and maybe, deep down, you already do. Maybe that is why certain images from the Book of the Dead stir something inside you. Not fear, but familiarity. Not superstition, but a subtle, cellular memory. Because these are not just remnants of an ancient culture. They are fragments of a language your soul once spoke. And now, you are starting to hear it again. The greatest form of control is not to burn the books. It is to convince the world they were never worth reading. And that is exactly what happened to the Book of the Dead. Over centuries, the texts that once guided souls through the labyrinth of eternity were reduced to museum artifacts, stripped of their power and flattened into mythology. The message was made clear. This is not knowledge. This is fantasy. Primitive, outdated, irrelevant. But what if that wasn't an accident? What if the real reason these teachings were buried was because they threatened the very foundation of the systems we live under today? When the West first encountered ancient Egypt, it did not seek to understand, it sought to possess. Colonial powers looted temples, stole papyri, and placed sacred relics behind glass, declaring the culture dead while parading its stolen wisdom as exotic art. Academics translated the texts with a clinical detachment, severing them from their spiritual and energetic roots. Rituals became rituals in quotation marks. Gods were downgraded to characters in a myth. And the real meaning, the instructions, the energetic blueprints, the path of initiation, was lost in the translation. Or more accurately, it was deliberately erased. The rise of monotheistic religions accelerated this suppression. Anything that did not fit the new narrative of sin, salvation, and a singular male deity was declared heresy, blasphemy, or paganism. The Book of the Dead, with its multi-layered soul, its non-linear afterlife, and its self-directed judgment, was far too dangerous. It implied that you did not need a priest to mediate your connection to the divine, that you did not need to earn your place in eternity through blind obedience, that the soul was powerful enough, sovereign enough to navigate the afterlife on its own, if properly prepared. That was a truth that could never be allowed to stand. Instead, the collective worldview was reshaped to fear death, to see it as punishment or finality, to imagine the afterlife as a binary choice of reward for conformity or eternal torment for rebellion. Heaven or hell, obey or suffer. This is not spiritual truth. This is spiritual politics, and it is designed to make you small, to make you forget that entire civilizations once prepared their people for death with dignity, with knowledge, and with empowerment. That death was not a threat, it was a graduation. Even science, in its own way, joined the effort. In the age of rationalism, anything that could not be measured was ridiculed. Spiritual experiences were dismissed as hallucinations. Symbols were labeled as nonsense. The soul was called a delusion. But look closely at the irony. Modern physics now speaks of non-locality, of consciousness not being confined to the brain, of particles behaving differently simply because they are observed. These discoveries do not contradict ancient teachings, they confirm them. But by the time science came full circle, the cultural damage had been done. The education system never taught you this history. Most people graduate without even knowing the Book of the Dead exists, let alone what it truly contains. And if they do hear of it, it is in the same breath as fairy tales and myths, as something dead, like the mummies in the museum. But this is not just the loss of cultural heritage. It is the loss of spiritual direction. Because when you do not know what death is, you do not truly know what life is either. You live reacting to fear instead of responding to truth. You chase safety instead of seeking meaning. You become predictable, compliant, easy to manage. And that is the point. A society disconnected from death is a society easier to control. A person disconnected from the soul's journey is someone who will trade truth for comfort, purpose for possessions, and freedom for familiarity. The Egyptians did not live that way. They spent their lives preparing for the moment of transition, not because they feared it, but because they respected it. Because they knew that to die well, you had to live well, with integrity, courage, and remembrance. And maybe that is why these teachings were buried. Not because they were obsolete, but because they were too powerful. Because a person who remembers who they are, who knows what death is and what it is not afraid to live freely, not afraid to speak, to feel, to create, and certainly not afraid to die. For thousands of years, the teachings of the Book of the Dead were dismissed as mythology, imaginative folklore from a civilization lost to time. But if you listen closely to the experiences of people today, those who have come face to face with the very edge of existence, you begin to hear something eerily familiar. Because while the world may have forgotten the wisdom of the ancients, death has not. And every so often, it whispers the same truth through new voices. Near-death experiences, reported by people from every culture, religion, and background, describe phenomena that, according to our materialist worldview, should not be possible. Consciousness, continuing after all brain activity has ceased. Life reviews that unfold outside of linear time. Encounters with luminous beings who communicate not with words, but with pure thought. A tunnel, a threshold, a feeling of being observed, not judged, but deeply, fully seen. And always there is a sense of returning, not to somewhere new, but to somewhere profoundly remembered. These accounts echo, almost perfectly, what the Book of the Dead described. The journey through otherworldly realms, the presence of guardians at the gates, the confronting of one's life not as a list of events, but as a vibrational field. The realization that thought and emotion instantly shape the environment of the soul. These are not New Age fantasies. They are the same messages, spoken in new tongues, by people who touched the veil and were sent back. Then there are the reports from modern psychedelic explorers, those who have entered altered states through sacred plants and compounds that were used for millennia in spiritual traditions. DMT, in particular, often leads users into realms that defy language, landscapes of impossible geometry, encounters with intelligent beings of light, and a confrontation with a consciousness far greater than their own. The experience is often described not as a hallucination, but as being more real than real. And again, the parallels are striking. The psychedelic journey, like the trials of the Duat, forces the user to confront themselves. It demands a letting go. It exposes the attachments, the fears, and the egoic constructs that bind us to lower frequencies. Just as the Egyptian soul must speak the truth at each gate, the psychedelic traveler must surrender to the illusion or remain trapped in loops of fragmented perception. The journey only opens when the ego lets go. Quantum physics, too, is beginning to brush against these ancient truths. The concept that observation changes reality. The idea that particles exist in multiple potential states until they are measured. The evidence that time is not linear and may be interwoven with space. The hypothesis that consciousness is not produced by the brain but is instead received by it, like a signal through a radio. These ideas mirror the cosmology encoded in the Book of the Dead, where the soul is not confined to one form or one place, but exists on multiple levels of awareness, navigating realms of pure thought and spirit. What we are beginning to understand now through science and medicine, the Egyptians laid out in their sacred texts over 3 millennia ago. They were not guessing, they were not speculating, they were mapping, they were documenting a process that happens not just at the end of life, but throughout it, for those willing to look within. The Duat is not just where the soul travels after death. It is the realm you touch in dreams, in deep meditation, in the liminal spaces between sleep and wake, silence and sound, thought and pure knowing. And this is why these teachings still matter. They do not belong to a time. They belong to consciousness itself. They point us back to what we have always known, deep down. That this life is not the whole story, that reality is not what it seems, and that we are not just flesh and memory, but presence and awareness, journeying through a layered, intelligent cosmos that responds not to belief, but to vibration. The ancients used symbols and stories because that was the only way to speak of what cannot be fully spoken. But now the veil is thinning. People are remembering through their own experiences, on operating tables, in deep meditation, under the stars, and through sacred medicine. Different paths, same truth. The map is re-emerging, the language is shifting, and the deeper message remains unchanged. You are not your body, and death is not your end. It is the portal through which truth becomes unavoidable. The teachings of the Book of the Dead were never meant to be locked away in tombs or buried under the sands of a forgotten empire. They were designed to be lived, not worshipped, but applied. Every line of hieroglyph, every image of a god, every spell etched into ancient stone was a guide that pointed to a truth far deeper than religion, a truth about mastery, and that mastery was not reserved for kings or priests. It was for anyone willing to walk the path of remembrance. The path, however, begins with responsibility. You have been trained to forget who you are, and that is not entirely your fault. But waking up, that is on you. And once you understand what the Egyptians were truly showing us, you begin to see that every single moment is a chance to return to that ancient knowledge. Not through blind imitation, but through conscious integration. This is not about reviving old rituals just to feel spiritual. It is about embodying what those rituals were pointing toward: sovereignty of the soul, clarity of mind, and lightness of heart. Start here. Ask yourself, what am I carrying that is making my heart heavy? Is it shame, guilt, the need to be accepted by people who do not see me, the fear of being judged? These are not just emotional struggles, they are energetic weights, and every day you continue to carry them, your soul forgets a little more of what it is here to do. The weighing of the heart is not an event that happens once after you die. It happens slowly, day by day, in the quiet moments when you lie to yourself to keep the peace, when you play small because it feels safer, when you know better but choose comfort over growth. But you can reverse it. You can begin to live in a way that keeps your heart light, your energy clear, your soul awake. The Egyptians did not wait until the moment of death to prepare. Their entire lives were oriented around spiritual alignment. Through conscious living, ritual, reflection, and the pursuit of harmony with Ma'at, you can do the same. You can reclaim that focus. Start by watching your thoughts, not to control them, but to notice how often they arise from fear instead of truth. Start questioning your beliefs, not to discard them, but to trace their roots back to their origin. Start speaking with intention, moving with presence, choosing honesty even when it costs you comfort. Because the truth is, you are already on the journey. Death is just the most visible and final initiation. But every challenge you face right now is preparing you for it. Every loss, every betrayal, every dark night of the soul, it is not punishment, it is rehearsal. It is the Duat showing up in your life while you are still breathing, asking you, are you ready to let go of what no longer serves you? Are you ready to meet yourself without the filters? That is where real power begins, not in conquering the world, but in becoming so unshakably rooted in your own essence that the world's chaos cannot move you. The soul that knows who it is cannot be manipulated. It does not cling to validation or status. It does not crumble under pressure or comparison. It moves from a center of truth. And that movement is magnetic. The Egyptians called this becoming the Ark, the luminous one, the transfigured self. And that transformation is not locked in a sarcophagus or reserved for saints. It begins the moment you decide that numbness is no longer enough, that surviving is not the same as living, that you would rather face the unknown than stay asleep one more day. The Book of the Dead was never about finality. It was about freedom. It was a reminder that death is not the enemy. Forgetfulness is. That the greatest tragedy is not dying, but never truly knowing who you were while you lived. You do not need to become anything new. You need to remember. You need to strip away the noise until what remains is light and what rises is real. We fear what we do not understand, and we have been trained, generation after generation, to see death as a full stop, a tragic ending, a void. But what if it is none of those things? What if death is not a punishment, not a failure of the body, not even a separation, but a return? A return, not to nothingness, but to the truth of what we have always been beneath the noise, the fear, and the form. The Book of the Dead was never obsessed with dying. It was obsessed with what lies behind the act of dying. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. The moment where the veil of this reality is lifted and everything you pretended to be falls away. The moment where no masks can follow and no illusions can survive. You do not take your status, your image, or your wealth. You take your frequency. That is what moves forward. That is what is met by the guardians at the gates. And in that journey, everything becomes undeniably clear. They understood something we have been forced to forget. The soul is not here to be comfortable. It is here to evolve. And every moment of your life is a step in that evolution. Every relationship, every challenge, every quiet moment where you hear a voice inside you say, "This is not who I am." That is the soul knocking on the inside of your skin, reminding you that you were never meant to stay asleep, reminding you that this life is the initiation and death is simply the moment you see what it all added up to. You will not be asked what you achieved. You will be asked if you remembered. Did you live in alignment with truth? Did you love fully? Did you listen to your inner knowing even when it was inconvenient? Did you let go of the masks, the roles, the walls? Did you choose presence even in the midst of pain? That is what lightens the heart. That is what sets you free. The Book of the Dead was not a prophecy. It was a mirror. It did not claim to show you a heaven or a hell based on external judgment. It showed you yourself. And the most profound thing it teaches is that you are not waiting for death to begin that process. You are in it right now. Every breath you take is a step through the Duat. Every decision you make is a gate. Every truth you speak, every fear you face, every time you choose your soul over your safety, you move closer to the Arch, the awakened, radiant self. This is not about religion. It is about remembrance, about undoing the numbness that has been wrapped around your spirit for your entire life. The Egyptians did not just build pyramids. They built reminders, monuments to the eternal, not because they feared death, but because they intended to master it, because they knew something our world desperately needs to remember. You do not have to fear the end when you have lived in truth. You do not need golden tombs or funerary texts to pass through the gates. You need presence. You need clarity. You need courage. And above all, you need to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Because when you carry that with you, nothing can hold you down, not fear, not illusion, not even death itself. And if you have not joined the Insights Academy newsletter yet, you are leaving knowledge on the table. Some truths cannot be spoken publicly, and we share them all there, along with your free copy of the Kybalion, available for a limited time. Do not miss what could shift everything. The ancients were not trying to scare us. They were trying to prepare us. Not for destruction, but for a return to the self, a return to the source, a return to the awareness that you are, and always were, infinite. You have just forgotten, and now maybe you are starting to remember. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."